with ChatGPT exploding onto the scene, over 100 million subscribers in 2 months when ChatGPT 4 came onto the scene. And industry leader is issuing stark warnings about where this new technology was taking us. All of us in the financial services industry are facing a critical decision point in terms of how much AI, how fast, and for what purposes. The stakes are high, both in terms of the potential gains in productivity and efficiency, and the potential risks in terms of job displacement, and the rebalancing of human judgment and control. In addition to these ethical dilemmas, there's, of course, the question of how much regulation here and abroad, and will government govern the deployment and growth of this powerful technology. Joining us today to discuss AI and human judgment are Dr. Jim Marone, economist at Rand Corporation, Boyan Pavlovic, CIO at BMO Financial Group, and Andres Rojas, Director of Applied AI Projects at the Vector Institute. And joining to the panel to moderate is Lawrence Muscio, who's the chair of the Long Run Institute and also an executive in residence at GRI. Vous savez, en raison de la nature de l'IA, nous en parlons toujours avec un regard tourné vers l'avenir. Avant de nous plonger dans ce débat de ce panel, jetons un œil à l'histoire de l'IA, car on ne peut pas savoir où on va sans savoir d'où l'on vient. And we'll roll the video.
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
That's an amazing video. Originally, we were going to do something on emotional intelligence, but we were voted down. So artificial intelligence. We've entitled the session, The Decision Maker's Dilemma, Artificial Intelligence and Human Judgment. And in my opening remarks, I'll sketch out what we hope to accomplish, what the decision maker's dilemma actually is in financial services in particular, and how vital it is to understand AI in the context of wider technological transformations, and then perhaps how to think about our technological present as a business and technology decision. This on a day where Microsoft is launching AI Copilot, incorporating generative AI and open AI into their products. So it's like the 1990s all over again. It's kind of a skeptical executive's guide to AI in financial services. So the decision maker's dilemma is threefold. First, it's an economic decision maker's dilemma because it's related to investment decisions, productivity, and workplace transformation. okay? We can talk about the existential threat to humanity and Skynet and all that kind of stuff, but that really is where the rubber hits the road for most of you decision makers. And also CEOs are being pressured in this environment to do something big in AI, and so there's a lot of froth. It's a technologist dilemma for similar reasons related to how companies institutionalize technology gains inside their companies. So AI is being used more and more in applications that can, say, enhance the customer experience or make risk models more sophisticated, transform operational efficiency, and that's just in financial services. And then finally, as we know, as we've heard all today, starting with my friend Neil, it's a policy decision makers dilemma on how to impose ethical and practical regulation without strangulation. And so if you read these days, Neil mentioned The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman as my most recent read, but the one before that was Darren Acemoglu's Power and Progress. There are a lot of bright people with a lot of experience who are telling us that machines will soon surpass human intelligence and may pose an existential threat, etc. Some focus on the remarkable capabilities, and it sounds like a gold rush, okay? Or a bubble, okay? So decision makers need to be aware, I think. If you want a good shortcut context to the current technological moment in AI for financial services, consider the two meanings of GPT. The first GPT is the one that we've been talking about all day, and it's generative pre-training transformer, the basis of developments in large language models, and that really started the gold rush by generating massive interest and attention by the general public as well as governments that, in fact, generated increased access to tech for researchers, competition for products and ideas, price decreases, and the like. In other words, it created a market. So it was no longer an engineering discipline trying to become a science, but it has been pushed into the land of business dynamics. And its viral pickup has been absolutely extraordinary. And ChatGPT will not be AI's final form, of course, but it shows the symbolic power of its power to compel, its capacity to reason, solve problems, etc. Okay? And that is one of the key elements in AI becoming a prediction machine, right? Once that was the preserve only of human judgment. The second GPT is the one I think we forget about, and that is general purpose technology. What is that? That is a term economists and historians use that is defined as a single generic technology that has much scope for improvement, eventually comes to be widely used, to have many uses, to have spillover effects, and then is expected to be pervasive and to impact significantly on productivity growth. Okay, think of steam, electricity, information and communication technologies. So AI is well on its way to being a classic GPT, and some of its cheerleaders are suggesting that AI will drive a fourth industrial revolution. So steam, electricity, ICT. Those are usually associated with productivity changes. Last week, Yann LeCun, before the US Senate, called it a foundational technology, and that it can be openly or should be openly shared in the technological ecosystem, right? So when you think of the great technologies that have transformed economies and societies, they took time for that impact of GPTs to build up between invention and diffusion. In the case of information communication technologies that maybe some of us are familiar with, it's a different story. It was relatively quick from the 1960s onward and included rapid development of computer hardware and software and so forth. So think of the massive fall in computing costs over the second half of the 20th century. So AI, through deep learning in particular, may be the basis of a fourth industrial revolution, and some suggest it could be an antidote to the slow productivity growth that we're experiencing in the last number of years. But it will take time. The technology improves, complementary investments and innovations are made, businesses are reorganized, and learning accrues. So the implications of AI as a GPT, as a general purpose technology, are pretty massive. You'll begin to see AI in a different light if you're being pressured to spend billions on it without a huge business case. We have about 2 centuries of experience to suggest how we could handle new technologies and where companies might wish to spend their capital in maintaining and transforming. So it's for a good reason that massive parts of the Canadian banking system run on 50-year-old systems. So when time's up for this session, we'll hope to have offered you something of an antidote to the narrative or future-oriented rhetoric by looking where we are now and how AI generates opportunities and challenges. So that's my frame, that's the context. I'd like to call on Boyan now, Boyan Pavlovich of the Bank of Montreal, to offer his 10 minutes, and then we will have 10 minutes for Dr. Maron from the RAND Corporation, and then for Andres Royas from the Vector Institute. So 10, 10, 10, and then we go into the lightning round for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Musia. So, we'll start with a double click because as a CIO in a large Canadian institution, BMO's been around for 200 years. 1817 is when we were founded. The other 4 or 5 banks are also over 100 years old, including National Bank, 1905, the youngest. As you said, as a CIO in this bank, we deploy billions of dollars worth of technologies across the layers of infrastructure, applications, APIs, data. We run servers, we run applications, and we are being asked the questions of how do we deploy AI decisioning models by CROs, some of them in this room, by CFOs, by business leaders. So I'm going to start with a bit of a double click because I live in that world, then we'll go a bit broader as to what this means for society. Just to give you a sense, technology in Canadian banking alone, if you were to take the top 6 banks, every year we spend between $20 and $30 billion on technology, right? So all of you guys sitting in a room here, TD, Scotia, CIBC, National Bank, BMO, we deploy literally a small country's GDP to run old servers, on-prem servers. We're moving to the cloud. You've heard that before AI, before big data, there was cloud. Before that, there was predictive computing. So we run through what I called archaeology of IT. What that means is that we're running mainframes that were put in by a CEO in our world, and BMO was Mr. Hart. He was the gentleman who put it in 1969, 1970. Our first ZOS went in. It was a gigantic mainframe. Those things have been updated, but it's the same structure. Every bank runs them. A lot of the old systems click into them. Risk-based systems click into them. Lending systems click into them. Decisioning systems click into them. We've then built distributed computing applications. We then added intranet applications. Then we started adding with this thing called the APIs, connecting applications so they could talk to each other. Then we started talking about big data, which is putting in large databases, combining the databases between all these, both cloud-based or on-prem mainframe databases. And now we're being asked to both put in an AI system on top of be it a risk decisioning system or a digital system, a fraud detection system. And these are big questions. And for us as CIOs, the best answer is yes, of course, we're going to help you. It's always yes to the business. We work for the business. We're always going to work for the business. But, the questions coming back very quickly are around how fast can you go? And look at this small fintech deploying a really cool generative AI model. Can I use that to make risk-based decisions within my organization? So don't feel too bad when the CIO says, what kind of decision-making model? What database do you want to plug into? Is it a vector database, or is it actually a database that hasn't been structured? There's all kinds of different data levels, right? Level 1, unstructured, structured, synthetic, analytic. This goes back actually to Immanuel Kant, but it's a different topic. But it's why do we have synthetic versus analytic data? But that's that mess, that archaeology of IT exists in every single large institution, asset manager, bank. On top of that, we're regulated. So we have to actually declare every major change that we make to these large applications. That is as complex in the US as it is here, or any large organization that's running a mainframe. So you will trip on a lot of those old systems. So be patient with your CIO, with your CTO, and be very specific around a use case. Use cases are friends to the CRO, to the CFO. Find out exactly what you want as an outcome. Is it an improvement in a back office process? Is it a decisioning tool that's going to allow you to actually make a better decision around a loan, commercial loan versus a retail loan? Is that decisioning going to access a vector database that's been properly assessed inside the bank for biases? Is a human going to be around there to check those biases? Because let me tell you, some of this AI can hallucinate pretty intensely. We can get ourselves into some insane solutions that will be societally not acceptable, financially not acceptable, sometimes even ruinous, right? Not to say that people can't hallucinate, and create all kinds of risk decisions, thinking, skilling, Enron, et cetera, so like learn off of the mistakes of others. But these things can be actually quite transformative if they're deployed not carefully, and also quite transformative if deployed carefully. So as a CIO, I would say to the CROs and the CFOs and the folks that are working with them, understand the topology of the IT of your organization. Go deep, understand the data you want to access, and work around a very specific use set. That's like a very small answer to what you were asking, which is like, how do you make this real when I go back? Because, and by the way, I'm a former consultant before I joined BMO, so I have all kinds of emotional connection to the consulting crew in the world, which is coming to the banks and saying, if you do X, it'll really help you outperform. If you do Y, watch out for that too. Sometimes it can be tremendously helpful, other times it can be quite dangerous, because you might get yourself down a road of spending $100 million on deploying all kinds of top-level AI solutioning on top of a data set that's not ready. And you're going to just waste. There'll be a lot of write-offs in the next couple of years, as there were in the cloud maneuvers, as there were before in big data maneuvers. How many hundreds of millions have we just written off because we tried to build something that didn't go anywhere? So watch out for that, because there's a risk there as well. In order to de-risk some of this is what we're trying to do at BMO, and I think all of my colleagues in the other banks are also doing it as well, but you should be doing this in a large organization or a small organization. Do drill your troops. Drill your troops on AI. So even though you're identifying a number of use cases that make sense, and you can work with your CIO to actually play it out and see how it works, and then train your risk officers, train your loan officers to use it, to mess with it, talk to the regulatory affairs, engage in a dialogue with OSFI, because they'll have an opinion as to how this is controlled. Can we audit this? Everything has to be absolutely above ground. But also make sure that while you're doing these use cases, you're also training up your troops more broadly to set up a vector database, to understand what's out there in terms of third-party models. Are there certain accelerators you could actually do separately from the old bank structure? We were talking Vector Institute, RBC Ventures, some banks have done that very, very well, which is let's play with it a little bit separately from the old world and see if it plugs in well. So train and drill your troops, both in risk, in finance, in the application layer, in the data layer. I haven't even started talking about data. There are maybe CDAOs in this group, CDOs, CDAOs, how they govern data is going to get even more interesting with AI, especially generative, and not even talk about open source AI. What is the residency of the data you're sharing with a third party? Where is that data going? Is it going to a friendly data center, or is it going to a completely out of country? Where is it ending up? Can you audit the flow of that data? Once you link in through an API, can you audit the flow of that data structure? Which is why, another reason why third parties will be quite heavily scrutinized and potentially even slow down in certain areas. So what I would say is, it's upon us. Projects are coming. You guys will have to do projects to kind of show to the management, show to the executive committee, show to the board that you're actually thinking about this. But don't, and I wouldn't say, there is something to be said about potentially the curse of the first mover, which could be, you could be the person off of which others make mistakes and learn off of your mistakes, right? So you don't want to be potentially that person either. So that's sort of my comment as a CIO in the weeds in a bank. and I'll turn it back to you to sort of go a bit more broadly.
Thank you very much, Brian. I said Jim was going to be next, but what I really meant was Andres.
Sure.
Yes, but thank you very much, Brian. And over to you, sir.
Yep, thank you very much. Thanks, Lawrence, and also thanks to GRI for hosting us. Maybe to provide a little bit of context of where my comments are going to be coming from, I think just to give you an idea of what it is that we do at Vector. We're a research institute, over 800 researchers, but more importantly, we're working with around 300 companies now to try to de-risk the exploration of the state of the art on AI. So basically, the core idea is you want to build something. Of course, there is risk attached to that. The question is, how can you do it at a lower cost, right? And we have some programs that help companies do that. So as a result of that, we've completed around 400 experiences, right, where people have tried to deploy projects. And that gives an interesting baseline for the common issues that people encounter when they are deploying different types of AI models. And part of why I'm bringing all of that up is because the problems that people are facing constantly are exactly what you would expect. It's the type of things like, for example, do they have access to compute? Do they have access to data sets? That is a very important point. Do they have access to talent? Right? So that is, I would say, the very first line, the most in-your-face type of challenges that organizations deal with when they are trying to deploy any type of advanced AI models. But then there is another layer that is sometimes a little bit more subtle, but again, it's reasonable to expect whenever we're trying something new, which is, for example, we may not have the right governance structure. We may not have the right, we may not know what the risk appetite for trying this type of particular model is, right? So there are many layers of risks that go one on top of the other, right? Like, for example, well, the actual performance risk. Is the model going to perform when it's in production at the level where it was performing when it was in the lab? What are the invisible, the blind spots that we have not identified that can actually explode? So those are part of the things that we need to understand, that they may not be evident at the first glance. And then there is another layer, and basically already use cases have been brought up as a topic, but there is an important layer, which is how do you select the right use case, right? And a big thing of what we need to do when we are helping companies to work through their experience, right, trying to deliver these projects, is trying to mature those use cases. Because quite often, there is an illusion that we really have a well-crafted use case that may perfectly be something that is ready to work under a traditional IT paradigm, where you are basically modeling and you have a clear expectation of what's going to happen. But that doesn't necessarily translate into an effective AI model when it's being deployed, especially when you're talking about machine learning more broadly. So all of these, basically, what leads to is when you're trying to build an AI-ready organization, a very important point that tends to be overlooked is the culture that you have. Most large organizations tend to be risk-averse. That's what keeps them alive in the first place. But with AI, one of the challenges that we need to deal with is we still don't have a good understanding of when a model is going to perform extremely well versus when it's going to underperform compared to whatever baseline you want to set. So part of the game that we need to play in this world quite often is to try things, right? So there is an element of experimentation. There is a certain element of openness to exploration that requires a cultural component that is not always aligned with the culture that exists in the organization, right? So giving that space is a critical element in terms of trying to foster the performance of these models, because quite often you need to try quite a few combinations before you find the thing that is going to deliver value, right? All of that basically boils down to, if you ask me what is my main concern right now, is not AGI, right? It's not general artificial intelligence, right? It's about the deployment of these models right now have a lot of hiccups that are not necessarily related to AI specifically, actually. Quite often it's because we are trying to kind of fit a square peg into a square hole, or the other way around, right? So the challenge that we're having is that the infrastructure that we've built over the last, 50 years, since the 70s, basically, for IT governance may not be perfectly tuned for machine learning. It is more tuned to things where we are directing the models in a given direction. So those are the spaces where we need to rethink the way we do things. Like, for example, business continuity planning, right? Of course, I'm sure every single organization here has very solid BCPs. The question now is, when you're implementing an AI system, are those BCPs going to work? What about your standard procedures for, I don't know, let's say compliance or regulatory analysis or anything that you want to do to ensure that you are complying? Those things may still have hiccups and kinks that need to be sorted out. So those are the traditional things that we're still seeing quite broadly. Approval to access data, that is another big one. We have built all of these silos in the organizations that are designed with the purpose of keeping privacy, of keeping data secure. All of that is perfectly fine. But they have been tuned in a way that they are not necessarily AI friendly, right? So the question now is, let's develop these models in a way that we have the right data governance, but that is also a good fit for developing AI models, right? And that is something that is still a work in progress. We are still learning as we go as organizations. There are multiple different strategies that are being tried. And that is exactly the way that it should be. This is an evolutionary game. We're going to try different things. We're going to see what works. But the challenge with that approach, of course, is that we are at risk of making mistakes along the way, right? So that is part of what we need to understand, what is the risk appetite that we are building for all of these elements. The other thing that I also want to bring up as a consideration that I think it's an interesting point, and this is not my point today. Basically, I heard a presentation by Rich Sutton. He is one of our Canadian gurus in AI, based in Edmonton. And in one of his presentations, he was making a very interesting point, which is we tend to mix different types of AI in the same bag. So the distinction that he was making is we have AI tools and we have AI agents, right? And in particular, his area of expertise is on reinforcement learning, which is mostly around creating agents. And basically what he's saying is that these two sides, the tools and the agents, they're not easily convertible one into the other. So when you create a tool, trying to create or trying to evolve agency is extremely difficult. And vice versa. And what he's saying is that the current wave of AI, ChatGPT included, but all the different things where we are typically excelling, it's on the tool side of things. So his assessment was that the risk of having something that is kind of an autonomous agent AI that is going to take over the world, for example, right, to the extreme end of that spectrum, is very. It would be extremely weird for that to happen with the technology that we're using today. So basically, his general outline was that he was very optimistic in terms of how that transition, basically, let's use AI tools without major concern, because that is not really the key point. Basically, the breakthrough of going from an AI tool to an AI agent that can actually start doing the wrong thing is very difficult to happen. Having said all of that, part of the benefit of having all of these conversations happening is that by its very nature, because we are talking about those things, the probability of that actually happening decreases. And the example that I've been typically using for that is the year 2000, right, where we had all of these concerns around computers going crazy because all of a sudden they didn't have enough space for storing the year, right? And basically end up disappearing. So a big chunk of that, basically non-existence of the issue, is not because the issue wasn't real. It was because everyone was really working towards avoiding a dramatic outcome. So I think that is the spirit in which we need to take all of these concerns, because there are real challenges with AI. In particular, things like the inequalities that could be propagated, biases that are exacerbated, all of those things are very real, and we need to work towards avoiding those. But that is the part where we need to be careful in terms of what we are trying to avoid, to be effective doing that, right? So there are very practical concerns in terms of how to build that type of governance, and that is what our focus should be about, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andres. So much food for thought here about evolution and the models of governance, and maybe we'll come back to that a little bit. It also strikes me that it's always the kind of the shock of the old system, the revenge of the old systems, right? So they're still here, they're still with us, and so no matter how shiny AI looks like at the moment. So I now turn to Dr. Marone.
Thanks, Lawrence, and thanks for planning this panel. It's been a really interesting day. I think we've touched on AI in every panel, at least everyone I've been to. And by way of background, so I'm a national security economist, which means I spend my time thinking about how AI is going to affect society sort of more broadly. So my perspective, my co-panelists talked about AI within an organization. I'm going to talk about how it's going to affect markets from outside. But I'm not here to tell you that it's going to destroy the world. I don't think that's what's at risk. In fact, I appreciated the video before this panel because it really pointed out that AI that we're talking about today really has decades of technology behind it. And to me, what's new and where the risks are is in that G, the generative, right? Traditional AI, like when you talk to Alexa or Siri, that's basically a form of AI, but they're not creating an image or a soundbite for you, then passing it off as real. Whereas that's what generative AI is doing, and I think that's where the risks are for markets, because after all, information is what's traded, essentially, right? We trade on information, and we need to know which information is real and which information is not. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways in which I think this has implications. The first is sort of nuts and bolts financial scams. So we already, I think, probably everyone in this room is aware that AI is already enabling more sophisticated, more believable phishing attacks, financial scams, impersonations. And this goes both ways, right? AI could impersonate me as an account holder to my bank. It could also impersonate a bank to me as the account holder. And in the last few years, we've seen high-profile CEO impersonations. Essentially, it's raising the risks of insider threats, right? And so that's something to be aware of, but I think it's also something that's been discussed, so I'm not really going to dwell on that too much. I think a sort of broader, more abstract risk is basically reputational risk. So I know in the CRO panel, someone mentioned social media risk, right? Any influencer can throw you under the bus because they just had a bad time with your app today. But think about now generative AI creating a deep fake of a CEO on a supposed hot mic saying something really bad about the company's financials or product safety or even being caught up in a personal scandal. These can take days, right, to resolve. And in that time, there's a lot of cost. There could be even like regulatory investigations, legal investigations. Unless we think that's sort of far down the road, right? If you look at the war in Ukraine, we've seen deepfakes of both Putin and Zelensky passed off as real. And it's getting easier to make those. And so that's an area where I think we need to pay attention. But looking at markets more broadly, the same technology can and I think will be used to affect markets. So again, a real-world example, you're all probably familiar with the Pentagon photo from last May. A picture of the Pentagon with a cloud of smoke, and people thought there was an explosion, right? And it was released right around when markets opened on the East Coast. So it caused a small dip, and people figured out that it was fake, right? The local government and the federal government got involved to explain it. But there was still a window of time, right, when people weren't sure. That type of deep fake or falsified image or audio is going to also be more easy to produce. And the other thing about AI is that it's democratized this technology, right? So it could come from corners of the internet that we're not expecting. It doesn't have to come from a foreign government. It could come from, you know, that influencer who's just really disgruntled today. The other thing, I mean, I appreciate that Brian, you know, talked about testing. Adversaries aren't testing stuff, right? We know from online disinformation, they're just experimenting, trial and error, and see what sticks. So we're going to see floods of, say, deep fakes, and some of them will stick, some of them will be obvious, some of them won't stick, but there's going to be a different information environment where we're trying to make decisions and where financial algorithms are also trying to make decisions. And that's going to have increased costs because it's going to require additional robustness testing and of algorithms. There's going to be costs for constantly retraining them as the information environment changes. And so I think those costs are not just sort of abstract and diffuse. They're very real. So if you're listening to me being negative here, talking about this like rocky road ahead for markets, I think that's also where there's opportunities. Because as I mentioned earlier, right, markets trade on information. So if you had known the Pentagon photo was fake before everyone else did, right, you could have expected a dip in the market. You could have made a profit, right? It's simple arbitrage, like tale as old as time, basically, in markets. But that means there's an incentive to invest in technologies that can verify what is synthetic media. And currently, that technology is really terrible. We need humans to do it. We needed humans to say that that Pentagon photo was fake. They had to actually look at like the fence line. They had to know what fence was outside the Pentagon and say, that doesn't really match. Right? You need very detail-oriented people who have extreme expertise about the thing that they're looking at. We need technology that can do this faster and do it better and do it for more than just the Pentagon and North Korean missile bases. So I think that technology is very likely to come from investments made by the financial sector because that's, again, where there's money to be had. So not only is that an opportunity, but I think that looking down the road, if that is indeed successful, there's going to be great benefit to society there. If you look at the sort of AI assessing if text is AI does awful. It can't really tell what's been produced by itself or by a model that looks like itself. So that's clearly an open area of research that's going to be very important. And like I said, I think financial markets, financial sector really could be a driving force behind that. So I think there are costs here. There's broad costs. It's going to be a new world, somewhat a rockier world for a while, but there's also opportunities. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you very much. We have a good number of questions here, but I also have questions, and I've been working on them for like a long time, so too bad. Did I say that? No, I'm going to get to as many as possible, but I do have a general question. This is kind of artificial intelligence, human judgment, level 1, okay? AI's probable impact. Now, we've discussed the persistence of the older technological systems that Andres says it's an evolutionary game that you're saying. I think that's very, very fair to say. Boyan's introductory remarks absolutely back that up. So we're also dealing with a highly evolved regulatory regime.
Absolutely.
And that really kind of grounds the discussion about AI diffusion. So given our understanding of that, given our understanding of the evolutionary game, about the persistence of older systems, where will AI make an impact in financial services? Where do you think that the first major kind of breakthrough will come through, given all of those constraints? And I'll go to Andres first, and then Boyan and Jim, if you want to chime into that, you're more than welcome to.
Mm-hmm. Sure. For me, the big challenge that we have now is to make AI boring. Basically, everyone that we are focusing on right now is all the flashy use cases that we can focus on. A big chunk of the things where we can leverage this technology is, for example, in operations. It's cost cutting. It is invisible to everyone, really, and it's relatively, quotation marks, low risk, or at least it can be isolated.
Right.
So I would say there is this human tendency to say, hey, now we can use this tool, this new hammer, in all of these cool places where we couldn't use a hammer before. So those are the first ones that come to mind. What I've seen is that the use cases that are easier to implement are typically things that are relatively mundane and are typically things that have a huge impact and incrementally build organizational capabilities to deploy things that are more sophisticated. So I think that is what I would say is one of the places where we'll see more adoption as it becomes more commonplace, right? The boring stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So boring stuff first. Right?
Look, I mean, I agree. I think if you look at sort of the spend in large financial institutions, start with banks, there's asset managers around us, and then there's a broader market, obviously. In banks, you know, you can do a little quadrant, high risk, high impact, X, Y axis, and then put a couple of fronts that we're all fighting on AI, right? So there's obviously high risk, high impact, market risk, decisioning. That's big, right? I can see some asset managers, hedge funds play around there. They're also, their data's in the cloud already. They don't have this old infrastructure. Now they are going to be regulated, but I could see them playing around with decisioning, algorithms. They were even doing algo trading, high frequency, low latency stuff about 10, 15 years ago. Put some AI on top of that, and you can be front running the market. If you can very quickly use AI to scour Twitter, there's something going on, it's fake, right? So imagine making that real time, making market risk decisions, deployment of assets very, very quickly. That's high risk, high impact, and it's very complicated. And I could see smaller players do that because their data is most likely going to be in a single database or two databases. They can start doing vector databases quickly. If we go to a big bank, like myself and some of my colleagues here, absolutely, I would start with high impact, lower risk. High impact, low risk, when you map the fronts you want to battle, back office operations, right? So, for example, we in a bank sit on 50 to 60,000 different standard operating procedures, a given bank, 50 to 60,000. If you were to do an audit right now of BMO, RBC, Scotia, et cetera, you would find thousands of standard operating procedures. We constantly update them. So think about it, just a call center. Call center, a new person comes in, a new agent comes in, they have a disturbed customer calling on a certain item. That person has gone through a bunch of standard operating procedures, and oftentimes they don't even know what to do, right? They escalate to the manager, you escalate up and down, and stuff happens, and money is spent, and time is lost, right? AI you can use absolutely, and it's being piloted right now. You can start crawling across these PDFs. You can start having AI memorize these 20,000 standard operating procedures, let's say, that are not market risk driven. That AI can become a chatbot tool that your agent can say, I need help, you know, BMOE, Siri, whatever, BMOE. So I need help, BMOE, because, you know, the client's asking about a non-amortized part of their loan. What do I do? That thing will start responding probably even better than the manager, right? You can start industrialize that very quickly. Now, it's kind of boring, but you do it over and over and over again. You do that in mid-office. You do that in wealth. You do that in retail. You do that in commercial banking, right? So that's what I would start first. High impact, lower risk, lower risk. Higher, on that same thing, there's lower risk, lower impact. Absolutely play around with segmentation data, play around with some segmentation models linked to marketing. No offense to my marketing colleagues, but like if you're going to look at where do we deploy some of that money, what market do we want to go after, play a little bit with that. Lower risk, lower impact, you can probably move some share there. And then, lower risk, higher risk, lower impact, I would leave for somebody else to mess around with, right? That would be sort of my,
Yeah. So interesting because it sounds to me like augmentation, not automation yet. Right, and so that's the machine usefulness thing that Darren Asamoah was talking about. Jim, did you want to chime in, or do you want to? We'll wait. Oh, Andres.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to elaborate on the concept of there is a concept that is quite useful, which is the whisper bot. So you have someone on a contact agent, in a contact center, and the agent is the person talking to you, but they have a machine on the screen that is kind of whispering. the things that they can say. So all of these type of things where you have a human that is using their brain to filter things that are clearly wrong, there are, again, I'm not going to say that are easy to implement, but the technology has been ready for use for a couple of years now.
Absolutely.
Right? So there are, you don't need to automate the full pipeline. You can still have the human that is just being enhanced by AI.
Right. And that also sounds evolutionary. You know, people still put their pants on one leg at a time, for example.
Yep.
Right.
We're talking, we're bankers, right? I mean, it's, money is made by managing risk, right, and making
Right.
margin off of. So yeah.
Well, you know, speaking of bankers, we've got an interesting question here. They're all interesting, of course, but we've been hearing a lot about disintermediation of the traditional financial sector by more innovative and less regulated competitors. Now, does AI accelerate those kind of Schumpeterian gales, or does it hinder it? So that's maybe one of the big questions. Anybody? Yeah, Jim, you want to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, my gut reaction is that the firms that are less regulated and are already sort of innovating with technology will be quicker to try things out with AI. I'm thinking about, you know, firms that are doing mobile payments or that, you know, have mobile wallets, to see, you know, how that can help them. And I don't know what kind of, you know, competition that's going to produce with the more regulated banking sector, but I do think that there could be, you know, and to the extent that there are fissures, those could be exacerbated, simply because, you know, one side is experimenting more and has that leeway due to lack of regulation.
Right.
I mean, I would say just as working in a bank, maybe these are my famous last words. In 10 years, don't say this guy said it. When crypto came out, it's been recorded. And when crypto came out, we had a debate on that, and I made a big statement, maybe as big as Dr. Ferguson this morning, saying that Taiwan will be blocked by China in 3 months. But so I'm not as big as him. But I said, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, I said it's just I don't see crypto replacing a currency. Just don't, because systemically, a currency is important. The ability to issue currency, the ability to control it, the ability to issue fiat money is very important to a government, and that is a benefit for a society. So we are and there's going to be a digital currency, most likely in Canada and in the US. So we're going to figure out a way to properly regulate it and manage it between the large banks. Similarly, I think, you know, banking is going to stay. It's going to transform itself, but I don't see AI as a threat to large, systemically important banks that are absolutely important both to our economy, to our communities, to our ability to plug into other ecosystems globally, right? So I don't subscribe to this sort of the big new thing that's going to Schumpeterianly destroy the old fractional reserve bank and put something else in. I don't see it, and neither will blockchain. It hasn't. So it's just the archaeology of IT and systemic operating models that exist underneath governments globally is way too big, right, for something like that to take off. So they can be great areas to learn from.
Yes.
And then intake into a larger organization, absolutely. But I don't see a systemic threat unless we're like in a Mad Max world or something. if the AI thing does something crazy, but no, I'm not saying that at all.
Interesting in terms of apparel more than anything else. But yeah, I think that's right. I think that the power of incumbency and also the regulatory apparatus is so deeply ingrained. So it would really take a big bomb. Okay, we'll go.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think one element on this creative destruction cycle that also needs to be included is trust. I think that is a critical element that basically regulation plays a key role in that, in building that core trust in the system, because the reality is all of these systems are so interconnected that it's impossible to have a good assessment of whether this new thing is going to work just at face value. So that is where this additional layer of, regulation can build a place, regulation has a place on building trust. And the other thing is reputation. right? So those elements are very human, kind of act against these incumbents, or sorry, the other way around, against the newcomers basically, and favor the incumbents in terms of trying to ensure that the things that are being done with this new technology is actually safe to play with. Right?
At scale.
At scale.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree.
I think one of the things, and thank you for that, one of the important elements that you highlighted in your talk, and that Jim and Boyan also related to, was the, yes, archaeology, but also culture, the culture of banking. There are two things that a good friend of mine, a former CEO, used to say, and that was that there are two things you have to remember in banking. One is that it's a relationship business, and two, you need a really strong balance sheet, right? And so the first one really does make a difference, because if and that may be an advantage to large incumbents, to say, you know, we trust you to kind of implement this technology, perhaps more slowly and in a less kind of sexy way than let's say a Google might, but they have your money too, right? So that so it goes to the culture and institutional memory banking, and I think that everything that you guys are talking about relates to previous technological transformations, right? In information communication technology, even when Bank of Montreal, of which I know quite a bit since I wrote the book, is essentially in mechanization, et cetera. All of these things were in play. So including standard operating procedures, et cetera. It is not the most sexy thing to talk about, because we're talking about ChatGPT and the wonder of, you can, ask it for a funny limerick about your friend or whatever it is. But this is, something quite other and rooted. So it changes the narrative, doesn't it? It changes the technological narrative, because I think that there are a lot of promoters out there who are interested in promoting that kind of, this is new and an amazing kind of thing, and we're near the singularity.
I would say, like, just the key point is maybe at scale.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate like Moore's law, and don't underestimate Moore's law on AI. The first AI thing was, I believe, a little mouse in England, actually, like 1950s. England was a huge Turing, and obviously after the war they had a tremendous, I would say, a cluster of excellence of minds that worked on this problem. And the first AI thing was this little mouse, and it had 50 flops, floating points of operation, basically. 50 flops, basically. You could do 50 flops, so it could actually got itself out of a small labyrinth. 1953, this little thing, you could kind of wind it up, and it kind of learned its way through a labyrinth. 50 flops this thing was empowered with. This is the time still of ENIAC, right? The big computers. Today, ChatGPT has, they want 1.63 petaflops of data running through ChatGPT, right? We're talking about a ridiculous exponential curve of advancement, right? It's similar with CPU, and why is this entire Taiwan thing is quite linked to this, right? Because why did Dr. Ferguson talk about the risk around Taiwan is that they are one of the only manufacturers of tiny semiconductors which are needed for this intense amount of calculatory power that actually now exists in these supercomputers. So ChatGPT, one big thing. Supercomputers that are being used in intelligence, et cetera, for military decisioning, another thing, right? For large at-scale adoption, we're lucky in that we'll have time as a bank to kind of learn it, deploy it, and then compete at the margin against other banks and hopefully
So AI in financial services, that's what we're talking about here. And that's kind of the difference. Because if you go, for example, to Estonia, they even have the judicial system is depending on AI or using AI to actually deliver decisions, right? Deliver legal decisions, right?
Procedural decisions.
Precisely.
Like,
an administrative.
License,
it's not
Are you going to jail?
Yeah. Yeah, that would really be scary. I have a question here. Traditional model validation and documentation can be a lengthy process. So someone who is obviously given to understatement. How do you see this process changing with AI to make the process more agile, but maintain appropriate governance? That's a good one. Think of that.
That one's for Vector. We were just talking about that.
Yeah. Well, generally, we are not in the business of doing model validation because that is a kind of a part of the business function, right? So what we generally, what I can say is that one of the pieces where these models actually are good, it's at, let's say, designing testing strategies that maybe could take into consideration things that nobody else thought of. This exploration, these type of things where you are trying to test the boundaries of a system, that could be enriched by AI. So again, there are certain things like, for example, so the problem with model validation, with these models in particular, is they are so non-linear that traditional techniques that are conceptually based around looking at the borders of the system and just exploring that those hold, typically are insufficient for this type of models. So designing a better strategy could be an interesting application where you have two competing architectures that are, each of them are trying to test the other. So basically one is trying to fool one, the other one is trying to prevent being fooled by the other. Those type of exercises is exactly what gave us over a long evolution and cycles, ChatGPT and this type of thing. So we know those architectures to be quite effective.
Yes.
So there could be potential for application at that level. The problem is the last part of the question around basically making it responsibly. Because the problem is if the model has a blind spot, it's very difficult to know that it has a blind spot. So those are the things where basically I do believe that the solution for most of the concerns that we have with AI today are around enhancing humans rather than letting AI go with it. So you can accelerate these processes. Some of the trivial cases or some of the expected cases can be done with AI. AI will come up with something new, some additional points, but then you still need a human being that is going to have oversight of the whole process. I don't know if that helps because the problem is all of this is very theoretical.
It's a broad concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is an intriguing one. How do you control the hype factor in executives' thought processes? I won't say who said that, but I like it.
Educate, I suppose.
What we're doing now, maybe, is...
the board, too, right? The board,
Yes.
right? I mean, look, and the regulators will have to get so ahead of this. And we're all humans, like we're all limited by our own cognitive, rational way of thinking. So we're all limited by our limitations. That's always been the question for techies, like me deploying technology, right? There's always that executive that comes in and says, "Oh my God, I just saw a presentation on AI. What are we doing? The board is asking. We have to do something, right? The other guys are doing something." I think again, and we go back to use case. Absolutely make it specific, make it outcome based, put a circle around it, put some money around it. Measure it, right? I mean, I know it sounds boring. It sounds horribly boring, but that's that would be my advice, right? Because you're not saying no. You're saying let's talk about a use case that'll be useful for us to deploy and invite them to the room to see how it's done, even, right? But that is the bane of quite a few organizations. Yeah,
Exactly, and it's more prosaic, but it is more necessary because when it comes down to dollars and so forth. Jim, did you want to?
Well, I don't talk to CEOs, but I'll talk to, Department of Defense, and they always say the same thing. This fancy new tool we heard about, and not only use case, but also I have a laundry list of ways that we know these things fail. So, you might want to be careful. We should do some investigations before we should do some testing. We should, before we just dive in, because there are high stakes here.
Right.
And you hear the hype. The hype isn't always accompanied by those caveats, right?
Yes.
Just be clear about those.
Yes, exactly. I think you said something that
You mentioned Department of Defense.
the DoD
I
is
mentioned
like,
DoD.
We've been cut off. Yeah.
and on that bombshell. I think, yes, yeah. Oh, thank you.
Oh, dear.
Yes, yes. Maybe that was a warning. But I would say we're down to, well, one last question. It's so good. Okay. Stop it, AI.
I don't
I'm
think
going
it's
to ask
AI.
it anyway. I don't care.
It's not AI. They're trying to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right.
She's
okay,
doing
of
this,
course. GPTs generated like steam, electricity, agriculture, generated a lot of societal benefits, but also social disruptions. What can the financial sector do to do better this time, more benefits, and minimize adverse disruptions? Your answer in 100 words or less. It's a great question because it goes to how are we going to use it? Are we going to, because it's possible, will we, is it desirable? Is it augmentation or automation? Is it kind of crappy automation, like let's say going to a grocery store and having to be your own cashier? Like, that's great.
I would just say, look, my quick answer here, and again, it might sound a bit counterintuitive, and I say it, actually quite mean it, try to be socially responsible, and not in the sort of, we are socially responsible, and you put a little flat, it's beyond that. It's actually be socially responsible because we're about to deploy a huge amount of technology and accelerators into a large, systemically important set of industries that literally fuel our businesses. When I say that, I mean, put a Canadian hat on. When you start putting in those AI robots that are looking to automate jobs, look at the broader impact of that job loss on the Canadian economy. When you start talking about those AI tools making decisioning around giving loans to people, look at the societal implication of who are those loans going to go to. Will they go to a person who has means? Will they also be able to go to people that don't have means, that are new Canadians, that are struggling, right? So I think if we apply ourselves, again, it's not sexy work, but it's really good work. We can actually do this, become a GPT, a true GPT, a generally transformative technology, and actually use banking to further the good.
Yes.
That's sort of my view, yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. And with that, we end our session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.